and any number above zero is tragic, problematic, heartbreaking, and indicative of the fact that more needs to be done to protect civilians in Gaza. It is also true that we are dealing with a belligerent, Hamas, that has a track record of co-locating itself and embedding itself within civilian infrastructure. Anything else on Gaza before we close out this topic?
Sorry, but on this one, can you clarify something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the number exaggerated, or is the UN number is based on the people they can prove actually that they have identified with the birth certificate with ID, while others is the number who has not been identified.
Nadia, I will leave it to the UN and OCHA to clarify any discrepancy.
Yeah, but it's misleading from here to say it's exaggerated.
I'm not saying it's exaggerated. Right. Your colleague is, and frankly, that's the way that this works. You all get to say whatever you want, and then I have to respond, sir. We have not. What I am simply saying is that I will leave it to the UN and OCHA to offer any clarification on. I know that there's been some interest in how they've outlaid those numbers. I'll let them speak to that. What I can say, and I will just use this opportunity to reiterate it again, is that we've seen tens of thousands of civilians lose their lives, and that is unacceptable. That any number above zero is heartbreaking. We're talking about women, we're talking about children, and even those who have not lost their lives. Many are starving, living in impoverished conditions. It's unacceptable. Victor, go ahead.
You said we're working on the two-state solution. Can you elaborate in another word? Do you have a plan for it, or do you intend to introduce a plan? If not, why not?
This is something that we're working around the clock. We, first and foremost, are trying to get a conclusion to this conflict. We're trying to get a ceasefire, one that is rooted in the release of hostages and one that is rooted in the increase of additional humanitarian assistance, one that we hope can create the condition for further diplomacy. We're also continue to have conversations about other things like the integration of Israel, the further integration of Israel in the Middle East, that we think can help and further contribute to our ultimate goal of a two-state solution. But I'm not going to get ahead of that process.
You mean your plan? You're working on your plan or their plan?
We are working on a plan with the parties.
With
the parties to help us get to that end goal. This is not something new, Victor. This is something we have been talking about pretty consistently. We have long believed that a two-state solution is necessary to get us out of this cycle of violence. And what October 7th showed us is that it can no longer be business as usual with Hamas, and that is why we also reiterated that Hamas can no longer be a springboard for terrorism. It can no longer be under the leading entity within Gaza, and we need to see a Gaza that is reunited with the Palestinian Authority.
But also experience.
Go ahead, Alex. Go ahead.
Quickly on one more quick question on Georgia. I want to move to Ukraine, if I may.
Okay.
A message to protesters. We have heard from European allies. They all said, multiple statements actually came out, said that we hear you, we stand with you. Is there anything that prevents you from saying the same?
So, Alex, again, when it comes to protests, we certainly believe in people's ability and their right to free speech and their right to self-expression. As it relates to this particular scenario, again, there's a limit to what I can say given privacy considerations. We're aware of the media reports of some U.S. citizens being detained in Tbilisi, but that's all I have for you.
But the protesters, do they have your back?
I don't have any. Again, Alex, I'm not going to get into the specifics of detentions. I understand that this is something you are quite passionate about, but we're talking about a consular issue at the end of the day, and so there is a limit to what I can get into given privacy concerns.
Fair enough. On Ukraine, thank you for a readout on the Secretary's trip, with the caveat that the trip still continues. Right. Is it fair to expect any announcement from the Secretary when it comes to material support?
Well,
don't get me wrong, the speech was powerful. He spoke about everything about the past tense, future tense, but President Zelensky actually said that Kharkiv urgently needs 2 patriots to protect its citizens. Did the Secretary go all the way there empty-handed?
So I think, as you so noted, Alex, the trip is not concluded yet, and so I'm just not going to get ahead of the Secretary or the process here.
And I have one more, if I may. You can take it from me if you want. It's about Kakhovka Dam. The Secretary made a speech, and he mentioned Russia, caused the damage. I remember we have discussed that since last year, and this is the largest man-made disaster that I think you guys had your own investigation. The fact the Secretary finally mentioned that Russia made this damage, is it a conclusion of the investigation, or how can we?
I would not interpret the Secretary's comments as offering an assessment on the investigatory process. I mean, what we're talking about here, Alex, is the fact that Russia has infringed on Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty. That much of this, all of this, is Russia's doing. Their sheer existence and presence in Ukraine is the cause of some of this heartbreaking damage and destruction that we're seeing. But continuing to support our partners in Ukraine, including to support some of these kinds of critical infrastructure projects, we believe are feed into some of these key tenets that the Secretary talked about, ensuring that we can support and revitalize not just Ukraine's economy, but also support it democratically as well.
I'm asking because the European Parliament...
I've gotten you like 4 questions. Go ahead, DR. Go ahead, DR. Thank you.
Vedant. Today my question is a bit long, but I will try to give you a clear image.
Today it's a bit long?
The question is a bit long, yeah. A question on Rojava, northern Syria. After years of occupation of Afrin by Turkey and Turkish-backed Syrian National Army SNA factions, the human rights situation in Afrin is deteriorating further. A new report published today and submitted to the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria by Ceasefire Center and Yasa Kurdish Center. The report finds that the continuation of cutting down olive trees and burning all of the fields, illegal settlement and demographic change, destruction of cultural heritage, violation of housing, land, and property rights, kidnapping for ransom, and last but not least, in Afrin, much of the civilians population, the Kurdish population in particular, lives in a constant state of fear due to the threat of the violence. My question is that what's the U.S. State Department reaction to these violations and demographic change, and what actions this building has taken to make those groups responsible for their actions and atrocities?
So we believe that the rights of all Syrians should be respected, and we urge continued respect for international law, applicable legal protections, and the protection of vulnerable communities. We also encourage all parties to act in a manner that promotes peaceful coexistence and respect for human rights, and will continue to shine light on human rights violations and abuses throughout Syria. We also want to promote accountability for those responsible.
And have you ever reached to your Turkish partners on that issue?
Our partners in Turkey are important key NATO allies, and we talk to them about varying issues all the time. I'm not going to get more specific than that. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's a whole different region. It's Mexico. The Mexican government has opened a criminal case against one of Mexico's most important anti-corruption crusaders. Her name is Maria Amparo Casar. Her organization has received several U.S. government grants to fight impunity in Mexico. Most critics have denounced the case against Mrs. Casar as a move to scare independent watchdogs in Mexico, but wanted to see if you have a comment about this case.
I don't. I would just defer to the Mexican judiciary system to speak to this.
But she's a recipient of U.S. grants. Should the U.S. government stand by her?
That's nice that she's a recipient of U.S. grants. I just don't know anything about this case, and so I will defer to the Mexican judiciary system.
Can we follow up, because it's something that should be in interest of the U.S.?
I ultimately will defer to the Mexican government on this. Go ahead.
Thank you. The Christian Alliance has filed a lawsuit with the Federal Court of Iraq. The lawsuit aims to address demands for the recognition and inclusion of these communities, including their right to special seats under the quota system in the upcoming Kurdistan region parliamentary elections. My question is, does the State Department support the participation of all parties in the forthcoming local elections in the Kurdistan?
So we continue to support holding free, transparent, and timely elections. As a matter of principle, we encourage broad participation in democratic processes reflective of the region's diverse communities. So that's some hands.
society who miss you about genocide. Because until now, 15,000 babies and children killed in Gaza.
So I will echo what the Secretary, myself, Matt, National Security Advisor Sullivan has said. We continue to believe that we are not seeing genocide in Gaza. And I talked a little bit about this on Monday as it relates to the National Security Memorandum, so I will echo again. We have not seen any direct indication of Israel intentionally targeting civilians. What we are talking about, though, is more steps can be done to further mitigate civilian harm. And as I said on Monday, it's reasonable to assess that there have been instances in which Israel has not met its obligation of international humanitarian law, and more needs to be done there. And we will continue to assess those matters through the tools that we have at our disposal. But we have not seen efforts or any indication of intentionally targeting civilians.
I will follow up because you will say that you will wait international law decision. But there's a different example. 2 years ago, this is CNN News, the Biden called genocide for Russia after 2 months of start of the war. What is differences?
I talked a little bit about.
Do you think this is the contradictions for the United States?
It's not a contradiction. We're talking about two very different circumstances. We're talking about very different entities and interlocutors in this. Let's just. I spoke a little bit about this yesterday, but I'm happy to reiterate it again. First, let's talk about our partners in Ukraine. Ukraine did not launch a terrorist attack onto the Russian Federation. Separately, it is apparent that the Russian Federation has committed atrocities. We've seen that in a number of lines of efforts, most specifically in the forced relocation of Ukrainian children. Also, the Russian Federation has not, in this conflict, has not ever proven to be an entity in which it has the ability to police itself and to hold itself accountable. Let's talk about Israel for a second. Israel was the victim of a major terrorist attack on October 7th and is undertaking an operation to defend itself and to bring those terrorists to justice. Also, it is a country that has lines of efforts within its own system to hold perpetrators and violators of international humanitarian law accountable. And it is doing so. And we made that clear in our national security memorandum. So these are some of the key differences. I recognize that it is easy to draw a comparison to the conflict in Ukraine, but respectfully, it is just not on the level. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. Pakistani and US officials have held their latest talks in Washington on how to expand cooperation in tackling the threat of terrorism posed to regional security. Can you provide some details of these meetings?
So we confirmed with Pakistan today our bilateral intention to increase our capacity to meet emerging threats, specifically to increase communication on terrorism, specifically terrorism trends and movements of concern in a way that is not just actionable within Pakistan, but also an area that is actionable between our two countries. We also agreed about preventing and deterring terrorist groups and the work that be done in that place, such as counter IED investigations, technical assistance at Pakistan's western border, and other issues.
Yesterday, a missile fired by a drone struck a house in a former stronghold of the Pakistani Taliban along with the Afghan border. Would you confirm or deny if that
So I don't have anything for you that I defer you to my colleagues at the Pentagon.
So one last question.
Sure.
Iranian traders smuggle more than $1 billion worth of fuel into neighboring Pakistan annually. Is it a concern that how black market earning billions of dollars in that region?
So all Iran sanctions remain in effect, and we advise anyone considering business deals with Iran to be aware of the potential risks. You've had your hand up. Go ahead. Yeah.
Notice. Can you confirm that the State Department did not have any personnel on the ground in Gaza for the development of the NSM-20 report? And then as a follow-up, if that's the case, can you name what NGOs, government entities are actually collecting the information that the administration made their assessment off of, and what the confidence level is in them?
So we do not have personnel on the ground in Gaza. I can certainly confirm that. I don't have a list for you of the NGOs and media organizations and civil society actors that feed into this process, but those are the kinds of entities that do when it comes to assessing and looking into these kinds of things through the various processes and tools that we have, whether it be the National Security Memorandum, whether it be Leahy, whether it be CHURG, whether it be the Conventional Arms Transfer Policy, end use monitoring, all of those things. We work collaboratively with our embassies, our consulates in countries where we have consulates as well, civil society, media organizations, all of those things feed into that process.
So, follow up if I can. Since you don't have personnel on the ground in Gaza, then are you at all, or is the administration at all concerned about the dissonance between the NGOs that are actually providing the information, saying that these things are in crisis and do violate law, versus what the report has concluded?
So the fact that we don't have people on the ground in Gaza is one of the reasons why that, coupled with the fact that we are dealing with a very dense and complex warfare setting and a belligerent that has co-located itself with civilians and civilian infrastructure, is why we have not made a conclusive assessment in the National Security Memorandum, and rather just believe it to be reasonable that there have been instances in which Israel's obligation for international humanitarian law has not been met.
So confidence in those sources is low then?
The confidence in those sources is adjudicated through those processes, and those processes then output into the various tools that we have. I'm not going to paint a broad brushstroke about whether every single source is accurate or confident or not. That's certainly not the case, but that is why we have a process for these things, for people to report, input things that they see, that they have concern, and then we have these various processes, including this newly National Security Memorandum, to look into these various issues. Go ahead.
Thank you. The new president of North Macedonia refuses to honor the Prespa agreement and to use the new name of the country. As you know, President Biden has signed an executive order which lists the obstruction of the Prespa agreement as a sanctionable offense. Can you please clarify whether the rhetoric of elected officials who refuse to use the proper name of the country meets the threshold for the sanctions that are listed in this executive order?
So we're firmly committed to the Prespa agreement and North Macedonia's Euro-Atlantic integration. A new government is formed and a prime minister selected. As a new government is formed and a prime minister selected, we will continue to reinforce the importance of adherence to international agreements and the benefits of full membership in the European Union. Sean, I saw your hand go up. Go ahead.
Sure. Can I go to Africa?
Sure.
Two things. Niger, the junta's prime minister gave an interview to the Washington Post in which he blamed a visit by Assistant Secretary Fee for the for the decision to boot out U.S. troops, saying that she made threats about Niger's relationship with Iran and Russia and called that unacceptable. Do you dispute the characterization of this? Do you have any comment?
So I'm not going to get into the specifics of our diplomatic deliberative conversations, Sean, but what I can say is that the CNSP was presented with a choice based on mutual interest about whether it wished to continue its security partnership with us, a choice that was rooted in our belief of democratic principles and what was in our national security interest. And this message that was conveyed, it was a coordinated U.S. government position, and it was in response to very valid concerns about the unfolding situation in Niger. And after discussions with the CNSP about our concerns and its own, we have not been able to come to an understanding that would allow the United States to maintain its military presence in Niger. And we're currently working with the CNSP to withdraw U.S. forces in an orderly and responsible fashion.
Do you have a timeline for that, or are there any U.S. visits?
I don't have any visits to preview at this time, but I imagine these conversations are going to be ongoing.
Okay, unless anybody else has more in Niger, could I ask about Tunisia?
Sure.
There's been a crackdown on lawyers and the Bar Association in response. Some see this as a further crushing of dissent under President Said. Does the U.S. have any comment on what's happening with the lawyers in Tunisia?
So I've seen those reports that Tunisian government entities have entered the office of the Tunisian Bar Association and arrested a number of prominent media figures and detained civil society representatives in recent days. We're engaging directly with the Tunisian government at all levels in support of human rights, including the freedom of expression. I will say that this kind of action is inconsistent with what we think are universal rights that are explicitly guaranteed in the Tunisian constitution, and we've been clear about that at all levels. Go ahead in the back. Yeah.
Can I just clarify, given what the ICJ has said and a number of international organizations have said about genocide, referring to the question earlier, is it the US position that Israel can't be committing genocide because of what happened on October the 7th?
That is not what I have said or any official in the US government has said. What I am saying is that we have not assessed the situation in Gaza to be genocide. Go ahead.
Russian President Putin will visit China later this week. To be his first foreign trip as new term as a president. So what do you expect? Are you concerned China-Russian tie will be much closer? Or not?
So I've seen those reports, and if China purports to want good relations with Europe and other countries, it cannot continue to fuel the biggest threat to European security, and that is Russia's aggression on Ukraine. The importance of this is not just a U.S. position, but it's also been clearly communicated from our partners in the G7 to our partners in NATO and from the EU. If the PRC were to end its support for Russia, Russia would struggle to sustain its war efforts against Ukraine. And no country should give Putin a platform to promote his war of aggression against Ukraine. We cannot return to business as usual or turn a blind eye to the clear violations of international law that Russia has committed. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.